All right, good evening, everyone. I know that people are still trickling in, so we'll just begin. But Meretz Hashem, by the time we get through the sponsorships, we'll be ready to start. I don't want to penalize those who Baruch Hashem have been here since 8. So I want to begin really by thanking our sponsors tonight. To thank Robyn Schaffer for dedicating the shir tonight, for the energy and shiurim given here at the shul. Thank you, Robyn, for your dedication. To thank Pam Weissman for dedicating the shir tonight in honor of Patty Leve, Abigail, Rosemore, for all they have done for our congregation and community. To thank Nina Allen-Goldberg for dedicating the shir tonight to commemoration of the shloshim of her beloved mother, Miriam Garfield. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. We have an anonymous sponsor tonight in the zechus of our loved ones finding their shiduchim bekarov. Quite beautiful. Ruth Gordon, in loving memory of her beloved mother-in-law, Devorah bas Yaakov, on the occasion of her 10th yahrzeit. Gail Goldberg, thank you, Gail, in honor of Rebbetzin Rabbi Silber. Thank you. Jeremy and Rachel Lassen, in honor of Jeremy's siblings, recognizing the gift Tamar provided the entire family a little over a year ago, and acknowledging Noah's dedication, support, and constant guidance, all of which could not have happened without the sacrifice of their respective spouses, Ira and Risa. We thank Eli and Devorah Cohn for dedicating the shir tonight, Le'ilui Nishmas, Devorah's mother, Esther Nechama Bas Aaron Meir, whose 10th yahrzeit will be this Pesach. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshama will have an aliyah in the family in Nechama. We thank Chaim and Hallie Gottesman for dedicating the shir tonight in honor of Shel Rosenfeld, Tanya Shichman for dedicating the shir in honor of Rebbetzin Silber, and an anonymous sponsor as well. We thank all of our sponsors. It's quite beautiful to see the outpouring of support, and it's quite beautiful, Baruch Hashem, as I remarked by our Purim shir, it's quite beautiful to be able to be at a point in time where we're able to begin learning together in person, growing together in person. Baruch Hashem, I think we've utilized all the technological possibilities that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has put on this good earth to be able to learn Torah together, but nothing is quite like being able to share the experience of spiritual growth together. I also want to take the opportunity to thank Shani Tapper, to thank our incredible executive director for all of her incredible work, to thank our office manager, Michal Reitberger, for her incredible work, and really these two incredible women work indefatigably on behalf of our Kehillah, just trying to accomplish so many incredible things. I know I often drive them crazy with a lot of last-minute changes and additions, but you would never know. They're so composed and so wonderful, so thank you. Thank you for working so hard on behalf of our Kehillah. And also, I just want to take the opportunity, I see Jamie Rubin is here. I want to take the opportunity, many of you don't necessarily know Jamie, but our community owes Jamie an incredible amount of debt. The Rubins have been longtime members of our Kehillah, and Jamie has been someone who has shepherded our shul, and really the truth is our entire community from the beginning of this pandemic, from right when we had to shut down after Purim until now. And Jamie, just on behalf, I'm sorry, I'll ask you, I'll call you for Mechila later on, but Jamie is the wonderful young woman sitting right over here. You could thank her yourself afterwards, but Jamie, really on behalf of the Kehillah, I know how much of your time I took, and it didn't matter nights, Sundays, weekends, Erev Shabbos. Thank you for always being available to us, and thank you for always being able to guide us with such profound, dispassionate, and solid advice. I honestly feel that Baruch Hashem, we are hopefully on the other end coming out of this because of the advice of Jamie and others like her. So Jamie, on behalf of the entire Kehillah, thank you very much. We have the incredible privilege tonight to begin our journey into Pesach. I think this is the first year I have ever given a Pesach shir 3 weeks before, a little bit less than 3 weeks now before Pesach, which I guess is a good idea for a women's shir. I'm guessing within the next couple of weeks, the availability to learn about Pesach is probably significantly diminished. But it also offers or represents really an incredible opportunity to also begin focusing on the Yom Tov of Pesach a little bit earlier than we normally do. I think that what often happens in our Yom Tov preparation is that we get so wrapped up and so swept up in the actual physical preparation for Yom Tov, which of course Pesach has more than any other Yom Tov, and that by the time we kind of get into the Yom Tov spirit, we're so exhausted and so depleted, and we come to Yom Tov, and I know that something special is happening. I know that something incredible is unfolding, but I haven't necessarily done the work to be able to truly understand and appreciate what the dynamic is. So it's a special privilege. I want to thank you for the privilege of getting ready for Pesach this year a little bit earlier than I normally do. And hopefully, again, through the journey that we're going to take this evening, your appreciation of Pesach and Emeretz Hashem, your Yom Tov of Pesach, will be just a bit more meaningful. I want to begin with source number 1 on the sheet. Hopefully, everyone has the source sheets. I want to begin with source number 1. So this is an incredible Gemara in Maseches Pesachim. Do you have a source now? I have an extra one. I want to begin with source number 1, an incredible Gemara that I'm sure you've all seen over the years, but one which requires incredible explanation. So the Gemara says, "B'chol dar vadar, chayiv adam liros es asmo kili yotza mimitzrayim." In every generation, a person is obligated to see themselves as if they left Egypt. So this is actually a Mishnah in Maseches Pesachim, and it's a very profound Mishnah. What the Mishnah says is as follows: that in general in Judaism, we don't celebrate historical events. In Judaism, what we do is we take historical events, we extract contemporary meaning, and we use them to infuse contemporary meaning into our lives. So as such, when we come to the Yom Tov of Pesach, we are not simply celebrating an event that occurred thousands of years ago, but rather what the Mishnah is telling me is that my obligation on Pesach, and this is specifically on the night of the Seder, is to see myself as if I have left Egypt, which of course on a basic level means that on the Yom Tov of Pesach, specifically at the Seder, I am supposed to experience some, we'll call it salvational, some type of freedom experience. I am supposed to feel as if I was enslaved and now I've been free. That is the euphoric feeling that a person is supposed to experience on the night of the Seder and over the course of Pesach. And the question is obvious. How does one experience this? In general, when we see things like this, I understand what the rabbis are trying to accomplish. I just don't understand how to accomplish it. I'll give you another example of this. Tisha B'Av, we all know that we're supposed to mourn for the Beis HaMikdash on Tisha B'Av. What's the problem? It's a long time ago, right? A very serious. Thank you. Was that Chaya? Good. Right. So I thought it was a bas kol for a second. Then I said, so Chaya says a very good point. In other words, how am I supposed to mourn for something that I haven't had for 2,000 years? So conceptually, I understand my life is deficient. I understand something's lacking. I understand that there's a void. I understand there was something beautiful called the Beis HaMikdash, and without it, my life is incomplete, our people is incomplete, the world is incomplete. But how do you mourn for something for which you have no frame of reference? This is, in general, the challenge we have with mourning for the Beis HaMikdash. And the same idea. Okay, I'm supposed to see myself as if I left Egypt. What does that mean on a practical level? So I understand maybe if I'm having a very difficult time in life and I've been extricated from my difficult circumstances, I could relate to this dynamic. I've been enslaved, so to speak. I've been enslaved to my circumstances. You know, the Svarim in Hasidic literature, they point out that Mitzrayim, the shoresh of Mitzrayim, which we translate as Egypt, is Meitzar. Mina Meitzar Karasika, the narrow straits. Everyone has their narrow straits in life. Everyone has their challenges. So if I was in a terrible predicament and I was extricated from that, I could relate to this. But what if I don't have that? What if, Baruch Hashem, life is generally okay and I don't have any dramatic trauma or difficulty? What exactly am I supposed to do with this rabbinic mandate to see myself as if I have left Egypt? So that's going to be the question we're going to focus on tonight. How do I fulfill this? But we're going to go on a little bit of a detour. I'll tell you an interesting story. Last week, Thursday night, I came home after Mincha Ma'ariv, and one of my daughters was standing by the door. It's sweet, they often come to open the door when I come home. And one of my daughters, and my daughter whispered to me, she said, this is a true story. She said, Mommy said she's not buying any more Chometz. That was it. And it was like a whisper. Mommy said she's not buying any more Chometz. And but she was so serious. It wasn't clear to me exactly. I know we're not out of food. We're Baruch Hashem, we're a good Jewish home. We could ride out 3 pandemics and we'll be absolutely fine, right? But it was fascinating to me because the truth is that statement said, okay, Pesach is coming, because what happens when Pesach is coming? Chometz becomes the ultimate villain. right? Chometz is mamish. Well, we know chometz represents the Yetzer Hara, but every Jewish home, chometz becomes the antithesis of holiness. Chometz becomes the antithesis of the Yom Tov, because we know chometz is an incredibly serious prohibition. And in fact, chometz is unique. The reason why chometz is unique, very quick, we're not going to get into a halacha shir over here, but I just want to point out what's unique about chometz. You can't eat chometz, you can't own chometz. You can't have chometz in mixtures. You can't have chometz seen in your possession. You can't have chometz found in your possession. Chometz is even asur banai, not even allowed to get benefit from it. We have no other prohibition that is anything like chometz. Tell me that. What's the most unique aspect of chometz? Or I have to ask you, the most unique aspect? What's the status of chometz 51 weeks out of the year? It's permitted. It's permitted. And yet chometz, which is permitted 51 weeks out of the year, is prohibited for 7 days. And not only is it prohibited, but it's prohibited with the most severe punishment that we have in the Torah, the concept of kares, spiritual excommunication. Nowhere else do we have a prohibition like this, where something is unequivocally permitted for a prolonged period of time for the overall majority of the year, and yet not only is it usher, not only does it become prohibited on Pesach, but it becomes prohibited, punishable by a very significant punishment. So how are we to understand this? In other words, what is so bad about chametz? I understand chametz is aser. We all understand that chametz is prohibited, and you all understand all of the prohibitions I outlined. What I'd like to draw your attention to is why. What's so bad about chametz? What is it that requires HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Torah to take such a severe stance against leavened products for the duration of the 7 days of Pesach? Now remember, you might think to yourself, well, perhaps it's antithetical to the notion of Pesach. I just want to point out, again, I don't want to get technical, but there is a concept called Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni means that in the event that someone was ritually impure by the first Pesach and therefore didn't have the opportunity to go ahead and offer up the Paschal Lamb, the Korban Pesach by the first Pesach, there's a makeup date. A month later, the 15th of Iyar. Interestingly enough, what doesn't apply during Pesach Sheni? Take a wild guess. Chometz. Interesting. There's no prohibition. So if you missed the first Korban Pesach for whatever the reason, and you're utilizing the makeup date, when you utilize the makeup date, you're offering up your Paschal Lamb, and if you want to eat it together with chometz, that's absolutely fine. So we see that there is a concept of having a quasi-Pesach with chometz, but yet we still see the severity with which chometz is treated on the Yom Tov Pesach. How are we to understand that severity? So take a look at number 3 on your sheet. So I'm quoting over here from a beautiful sefer called Mesilos Ba'ara Chasidus. And here, he quotes over here as follows, and this was such an amazing observation. Hine ha'hevdel bein chametz lamatzah. What is the only difference between chametz and matzah? Hurak ba'os achos. Interestingly enough, the only distinction between chametz and matzah is one letter. Ki ha'osios mem tzadik shavos b'shtehen. Right? Remember again, both the Hebrew words chametz and matzah both have a mem and a tzadik. So wherein lies the difference between chametz and matzah? V'rak ba'os hashlishes yesh hevdal. So chametz and matzah have two of the same letters. They both have a mem and a tzadik. The distinction is shebechametz yesh ches u'b'matzah yesh hey. The distinction is chametz has a ches, matzah has a hey. So just for illustrative purposes, I put a ches and a hey on your sheet. Not that you need the visual aids, but it'll help us a little bit actually as we go through this concept. So herein lies the fundamental difference, at least linguistically, between chametz and matzah. Chametz has a ches, matzah has a hey. What's the deeper meaning of this distinction? And this is where the Mesilos Ba'ara Chasidus kind of ends. So that's very interesting, and it is intriguing to note that there's such a nuanced difference. Remember, even if you look, ches and hey, are two pretty similar letters in the Hebrew alphabet, right? Even if you look at that, in fact, sometimes an error which could often be found in a Sefer Torah is when the sofer got a little bit too carried away with the leg of the hey and draws it a little too long, extending upwards. Then your hey could look like a ches. They're easily two interchangeable letters. The only distinction between chametz and matzah is the hey and the ches. So look at number 4. There's a beautiful Gemara in Meseches Menachos. The Gemara says, Mipnei ma nivra ha'olam behei. Why was the world created with the letter Hey. Now, what the Gemara is making reference to over here is that in the Genesis narrative, the Torah uses the word Bihi Bar'am, when Hashem created the world. So that's what it means. The world was created with a Hey, Hi Bar'am. So why was the world created with a Hey? So says the Gemara something amazing. Mipnei Shadom Elach Sadra. So I put the English translation over. You could follow along either in the Aramaic or in the Hebrew, because a Hey literally says is a similar appearance to a portico. To a portico. How so? So remember again, if you have a portico or like a gazebo, right? So what happens? It's closed on, let's say, 3 sides, but it's opened on the 4th. So the hay is open on 3 sides. Again, we'll discuss it as an opening on, it's closed on 3 sides, Closed on 3 sides and open on the 4th. Meaning what? Which teaches me that whoever wants to go out can go out. What does this mean? God doesn't hold anyone captive. If you want a relationship with the Ribono Shel Olam, that opportunity is there for you. But if you don't want the opportunity, whoever wants to leave is free to leave. That's the open side. The open side. So Hashem created the world with a Hey. It's closed on 3 sides. It's opened on 1 side. Whoever wants to leave the presence of God, the Ribono Shel Olam lets you go. Which, just as an interesting aside, so I just want to point out, there are some times where even good people take leave of God. I'll just give you an example of this. We know that when a person loses a loved one, they're in a state of aninos, an onein. And the halacha by an onein is that an onein is exempt from positive mitzvos. And in fact, some of the commentaries explain why is an onein, right? Why is a person exempt from positive mitzvos? Because they lost a loved one. So some explain because since you're involved with the needs of the deceased, there's a concept in halacha, osik b'mitzvah pater min mitzvah, that when you're involved in one mitzvah, you're exempt from a different mitzvah. But others explain that no, the rabbis understood that when a person suffers loss, a person may be angry with God. And it's okay to get angry with God. The good news about God is He has a very thick skin. A very thick skin. You can get angry, and there are times where maybe I feel I don't want to talk. And that's fine. And Chazal, the rabbis, gave me that room, gave me that ability to have a little bit of distance. Now remember, Aninus only lasts until when? Until when? Until the grave is filled in. So you can't stay angry forever. It's an incredible paradigm in general for relationships. Sometimes you're entitled to get angry in a relationship, but you can't stay angry forever. At a certain point in time, you have to re-engage and you have to work it out. You could get angry with God. You could even walk away a little bit. But at some point in time, you have to come back. HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the world with a Hey, closed on 3 sides, open on the 4th, to tell you that if man wants to exercise his free choice, his free will, and leave God, he has the ability to do so. Umay taima tal yakare. So if that's the case, why does the leg of Hey, why is there a distance, a space between the leg of the Hey and we'll call the top of the Hey, right? As you can see on your letter Hey over here. So if the imagery is that the Hey is closed on 3 sides, opened on the 4th, to teach me that everyone has the right to take leave of God if they so choose, then why is there a space between the top of the leg and the top of the Hey, the roof of the Hey? To which the Gemara says something so beautiful. Di'i hader b'tshuva ma'aylilei. What it says the Gemara to teach me that if I take leave of God, but then I decide I want to come back, I want to do tshuva, HaKadosh Baruch Hu leaves the door open. He leaves the door open, and the door is that space on the left-hand side of the Hay. That space, that doorway, is between the leg of the Hay and the top of the Hay. I could take leave if I want to. The bottom of the Hay is totally open, but if I choose to come back, HaKadosh Baruch Hu keeps the side door open for me. Asks the Gemara, but why? Why can't I just come back the same way I left? If the bottom is open, and that's where I could go ahead and take leave of God, why can't I come back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the same bottom opening? To which the Gemara says, Lo mistayim milsa. Because it's much easier to leave than it is to come back. And when you come back, you have to find a different way in than the way that you left. Kid Reish Lakish, we're going to explain this concept in just a moment. Am Reish Lakish, my dichsiv, what's the meaning of the pasuk? In meleitzim hu yalitz ula anavim yitein chein balitar misayin oso. So we're not going to get into this whole drush over, but the Gemara explains this concept balitar misayin oso, which means If someone wants to achieve purity in life, Messiah, so Hashem helps them. Now, the fact that the phrase tells me that God helps me indicates that sometimes I can't come back on my own, which tells me that coming back to God is more complicated than taking leave of God. Now, the truth is, we don't even need the Gemara to tell us this, because most of us have experienced this within our own lives. Because often we take leave of God. Person commits an aveira, person sins, which we all do. Some of us do it quite often and are very good at it. But when we sin, we take leave of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's easy to get out from the bottom of the hay. It's much more complicated to come back in. And so the way back into Hashem is not the same way I went out. I go out on the bottom, but when I want to come back, I come back through the side door, through the space between the leg of the hay and the top of the hay. So amazing. What's amazing about this Gemara is the Gemara teaches me that the world itself was created with the dynamic of tshuva. From the inception of the world was rooted, was built upon the foundation stone of tshuva. Now, we often relegate the discussion of tshuva to when? Right? That's tshuva, yamim noraim, elul. So we don't often think about tshuva as a function of the Yom Tov of Pesach. But when you begin to scratch beneath the surface of Yiddishkeit, you begin to realize something absolutely amazing, which is tshuva is a part of everything. Tshuva is a part of not only every Yom Tov, but tshuva is a part of every day, because tshuva is part and parcel of the fabric of the human condition. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov has a beautiful phrase. He says, the human condition could be summarized in one phrase, Ratzal v'shov. Literally, it means forwards and backwards. Forwards and backwards. It's interesting, because in life, most of us are aiming for what? What do most of us have the same basic goal? What's the basic goal? Or maybe we don't have the same basic goal, right? Moving forward is good. I think once I say you're going to agree, consistency. Consistency, right? That's like a good goal in life. And if you think about that, that's for everything. I want to be consistent in my relationships, right? Whether it's my human relationships, my relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I want to be consistent in my career, right? I want consistency is a good thing. And here's what's amazing. The one thing that we all strive for is often the one thing that is impossible for us. Because if there's one thing that we really are not good at, it's consistency. It's the same. I'll give you a simple example. If there is one thing that you could count on in every single human relationship, what is it? Failure. And I know it sounds like a little bit of a downer, but if there's one thing you could be sure of in every single human relationship, is that someone who you care about deeply will disappoint you and will hurt you. Now, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen intentionally, but it means it's always going to happen. And it's not going to happen because that person doesn't love you. It's going to happen because we're human beings and we're frail and we have good days and we have bad days and we have successes and we have failures and we have peaks, we have valleys. Life is this ratzah v'shov, it's this backwards and forwards. I wish I could be consistent, but most times I'm either moving forward or I'm moving backward. Rarely am I standing consistently in place. And this is so incredibly important. In the world of relationships, it's important because sometimes when people suffer a relationship setback, they're so overwhelmed by the reality that their relationship had a setback. Like they can't believe that something went wrong. And as if there's an expectation that everything in relationships goes right. That everything always works out. And it's such an aberration when something goes wrong. No. If you have a relationship, if you have any life relationship where everything goes right, please see me after this year and tell me how you did it. Tell me how you did it, because if you tell me the secret, I think I could become a very wealthy man by putting it in a book and sharing it with others. No one has a perfect relationship. No one has a consistent relationship. There's the ratzah v'shov. There's the backwards, the forwards. So why am I sharing this with you? Because tshuva, which means the process. Remember, you can only do tshuva if you strayed. So the process of coming back and straying is part and parcel of my everyday life. Every day there's tshuva, because every day I've fallen out of the bottom of the hay in some way, shape, or form, and now I have to make my way back in. But what is tshuva? Rabbi Soloveitchik in number 6 This is from a sefer titled Ala Tshuva. Ala Tshuva are Rabbi Soloveitchik's drushes on Tshuva. So I just want to point out Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rabbi Yosef Doa Levi Soloveitchik, he used to give a Tshuva drasha that would often go on. It could go on for 4 to 5 hours. Now, that a rabbi could speak for 4 to 5 hours, that's not a chiddush, right? That we all know, right? But the amazing part was that people stayed and listened. That was the incredible part. So people wrote down, Rabbi Soloveitchik in general did not commit things to writing. And this is actually quite fascinating. He didn't commit them to writing because the Rav felt that when you write something, it's set in stone. The Rav felt that thought was organic. Thought was organic. So what I think now is going to be different than what I think in a year from now, and certainly in 10 years from now. The Rav felt that thought always has to evolve. So that's why, interestingly enough, every year, every couple of years, there's a new book by Rabbi Soloveitchik. Rabbi Soloveitchik has been dead for 2 decades, but it's amazing. He's still putting out works, right? But again, it's because only now that the Rav has passed away that his students are beginning, well, now already, they're well into it, of committing his works to writing. So Rabbi Soloveitchik writes in number 6, and this to me is such a profound piece. The Rav writes, Ala Tshuva, he writes, Hargashas hatshuva, shabala tshuva kazeh, himugbeles. Tshuva, perusha chazara. And this is a very simple yet incredibly insightful idea. We often translate tshuva, as repentance. But the truth is, the etymological root of tshuva means to return. To return. Perusha chazara. I'm returning. La'anhu chozer. Where or what am I returning to? Hu chozer l'nekudas hamotza sheba amad lifnei sheyatz l'derech hachatoim. Umashahaya ben secular. So Rabbi Soloveitchik says something absolutely amazing. Tshuva represents the process of returning to what was. To what was. Or maybe better stated, it's the process of returning to myself. You see, in Judaism, we believe that we are born good. This stands in contradistinction, let's say, to Christianity, which believes that man is born evil. Man is born evil. And by the way, they get that from a pasuk in the Torah. It's a pasuk in the Old Testament, according to them. Ki yetzer leiv ha'adam ra minu harav. Man is evil from his youth. So again, that's why we have a Torah Sheba'al Peh, right? Torah Sheba'al Peh teaches us exactly what that means. It doesn't mean man is evil. It means man has a proclivity or a desire to be evil from his youth, but he is not evil. Man is inherently good. And therefore, Rabbi Soloveitchik says something absolutely amazing. He says, the goal of tshuva, see, we often think the goal of tshuva is to become someone different, right? I was this, and now I want to become someone different. Rabbi Soloveitchik says, do you know what truly powerful, cathartic tshuva is? It's returning to yourself. It's finding the person you were before life became so complicated and I became so complicated. It's about finding my pure and pristine self, which each of us possess. Now, I think the power of this is that as opposed to looking at tshuva as a process where I have to cultivate a brand new identity, I want to become someone new. Rabbi Soloveitchik says, I don't want to become someone new. It's actually just the opposite. You know what the irony is? What do I want to become in tshuva? I want to become someone old. I want to become who I was. I want to go back to what I was, to who I was. I want to find my pure and pristine self. And Rabbi Soloveitchik says something amazing. He says, essentially, tshuva is a desire to reclaim that which has been lost. I had something. I had purity. I had holiness. I had hope. I had optimism. I had a joie de vie, a joy of life. I had dreams. I had aspirations. I had all of these things. And then things happen. Trauma happens. Tragedy happens. Broken and frayed relationships happen. And so much of that evaporates. Tshuva is my desire to reclaim that which I have lost. And Rabbi Soloveitchik, he describes it with the Hebrew word Gaaguim. Gaaguim is a yearning, but a yearning for something you had, but now you lost. And I want to show you something. I've quoted this piece, I think over my 18 years here in Baltimore, I think I've quoted this piece probably 37 times, but it is one of my favorite pieces by Rabbi Soloveitchik, and I think it's one of the most moving pieces. Take a look at number 7. So the Rav writes as follows. Now, the Rav does something very interesting. what he does is he describes Gaaguim, a yearning to reclaim something that has been lost. He first describes it in the realm of human relationships, and then uses that as a springboard to describe a spiritual dynamic as well. Take a look at number 7. It's a little bit long, but it's so beautiful. He says, "Haga'aguim lazeh shehalach, ve'einam be'einenu kashim kishol." The most painful thing in life is when you yearn for something that you once had, and it's now gone, and you can't reclaim it. That's the most powerful, the most intense yearning. Hanefesh yotzis mi ga'aguim. Sometimes a person feels like they're going to lose their mind because the longing for what was is so intense. And look what Rabbi Silber writes on a very personal level. Hine lifnei Rosh Hashanah ze'ama lefanai b'dimyoni avi hagon. Rabbi Silber writes, before Rosh Hashanah, I saw the image of my father. His father is Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik. My father was my Rebbe. He was my only Rebbe throughout my life. And the Rav describes, before Rosh Hashanah, I had a conversation with my father. His father already passed away. I had a conversation with my father, and I told him, my father, my teacher, and he goes on and he says, Father, I came up with so many novel ideas. Remember again, this is the relationship that Rabbi Soloveitchik had with his father. It was a relationship of Torah. And he said, I told my father all of the ideas I came up with. And he said, Father, I know, I could tell there would be some things that I said that you would love, and other things that you would vehemently disagree with. This is how I spoke to my father in my imagination. But I knew that as much as I would talk to my father, he would never talk back to me. He says, Hi, kama hayisi noting, lu yacholti lahachlif imo devarim dechidushe Torah, velo lachamish dakos bilbad. Rabbi Soloveitchik writes, what I wouldn't give for 5 minutes with my father. What I wouldn't give, those conversations that maybe when he was alive I took for granted. What I wouldn't give for 5 minutes to tell my father all of the novel ideas and to see the nachas in his eyes. What I wouldn't give. And the Rav describes over here that yearning I have to converse with my father, that yearning I have to connect with my father. And I know no matter how much I yearn, I can't reclaim it. Aval yadati ki hademus ha'ahuva shahaisa krova kol kach elai. And I know that father, that loving father, who was so close to me for so long, is now so distant. And the heart is ready to explode from the intensity of the yearning. All I want, or what I wouldn't give for 5 minutes of conversation. And then he goes on in paragraph Bays. And this also is so moving. He says, the same thing is true, Rabbi Soloveitchik said, it was with my mother and my wife. Rabbi Soloveitchik says, I sat down a few days ago to write my Shabbos Shuvah drasha. And I would always, it's interesting, Rabbi Soloveitchik said, I would always review my Shabbos Shuvah drasha with my wife. He would review with his wife. And what would his wife say? He haisa ozeresli begibosh harayonos belitusham. And my wife would help me organize my thoughts. She would help me go ahead and organize the way I should express certain ideas. Gama shona kasafti es hadrasha. And this year I also wrote the Shabbos Shuvah drasha. Listen to what the Rav writes. Kishani shoelo son. Then I asked my wife, Ulai tuchli la'azarli. I asked my wife, can you help me with the drasha? Should I expand on this idea or contract this idea? Or maybe I should stress a particular point. Sha'alti aval kol ma'aneh lo ba. Rabbi Soloveitchik writes, I asked my wife, but no answer came. Rebbetzin Soloveitchik had passed away that year. I asked her, but no answer came. Efshar shahayach hat kol l'sheilasi. Maybe from Shamayim she whispered back to me, Aval hu nivla imashiv haruach be'ilanos ve'elai lo higia. But her whisper got caught up in the rustling of the trees, and her words never reached my ears. This is how Rabbi Soloveitchik describes those Gaaguim, that desire to connect with someone who you love, who you care about, who was in your life for so long, but now is gone, and how badly you yearn to reclaim that relationship. Just 5 minutes, just a few moments of togetherness, just a few moments of connection. And Rabbi Soloveitchik writes in paragraph Gimel, Kol Adam ne'emad b'mei chayav lenochach imos traji zeh shel Gaaguim. Everyone lives with this dynamic, this tragedy of Gaaguim, of yearning. El zeh shahaya ach lifnei zman katzer kol karov va'ata rachok ubilti musag. Rabbi Soloveitchik says everyone lives with the tragic reality of Gaaguim, of yearning. Some people live with the Gaaguim, the yearning of lost relationships. And some people live with the Gaaguim, the yearning of a lost sense of self. I used to know who I was. I used to have a clear identity. I used to have clearly articulated goals, dreams, and aspirations. I used to have a hashkafa. It's interesting. When you talk to a lot of people about hashkafa, you know how many people define their hashkafas in life? By what they're not. By what they're not. It's easy in life to define yourself by what you're not. The real challenge in life is, can you define yourself by what you are? We all have those Gaaguim. We all have that yearning, says Rabbi Soloveitchik, a yearning to connect with loved ones who are no longer here, and a yearning to connect with myself, my identity, that I know I once possessed, but because of a confluence of life events, is no longer here. I yearn to return to me. And says Rabbi Soloveitchik, that is tshuva. Tshuva isn't becoming someone new. Tshuva isn't transforming yourself into someone different. But tshuva is rediscovering who you really are. And I think if we kind of, recede into ourselves a little bit, we'll realize this dynamic of what Rabbi Soloveitchik is describing. How once upon a time, I really knew who I was. Once upon a time, I had a clearly articulated and defined identity. Once upon a time, again, I had those dreams and aspirations. I had all of these things, and then life happens. And the same way that sometimes life takes my loved ones, life sometimes takes me. And I'm not the person I once was. And tshuva is the process by which I identify the persona, the identity I once had, and I want to reclaim. Tshuva is going back to the real me. And take a look at number 9. Because now we begin to, we're going just a little bit out of order just for a moment. If you take a look at the Tal Lechaim, so this is a beautiful sefer written by Rav Chaim Cohen, zechus v'kalish levracha, who was one of the premier mikubalim in Eretz Yisrael. He was known, interestingly enough, as the Chalban. The Chalban, what's a Chalban? Is a dairy worker. Do you know where one of the greatest mikubalim worked in Eretz Yisrael? In the Tenuva factory. He worked in the Tenuva factory. He was an incredibly unique individual, one of the premier mikubalim in Eretz Yisrael, very interesting individual. And again, he was a dairy worker. He was a dairy worker, very important. Lest anyone tell you that you can't become great in Torah if you have a job. Clearly, you can become even one of the generation's premier mikubalim, even if you're working. Pretty incredible. So the Tal Lechaim writes in number 9, he says something amazing. He says, Pesach is called Chodesh Ha'aviv. It's called Chodesh Ha'aviv. Why is it called Chodesh Ha'aviv? Now, what he points out, we're not going to get into all technicalities, but he points out is as follows. Aviv, right, spring is a season. The seasons are based on the solar calendar. We in Judaism base ourselves on a lunar calendar, which, by the way, which is why sometimes Pesach poses a little bit of a calendrical problem. This is why, again, if we see that Pesach is going to fall out in the middle of the winter, we make a leap year. That's why the only month that's made into a leap month is Adar, because the only reason we make a leap year is if Pesach is going to fall out, quote unquote, too early. And this anomaly, this calendrical anomaly, is based on the fact that the Torah calls Pesach the Chag HaAviv, which again is very strange to take a lunar calendar and hinge it on the seasons. And the Tal Lechaim says something amazing. He says, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is teaching us about the power of Pesach. Why does the Torah call Pesach Chag HaAviv? Skip down to paragraph Beis. V'nei hatshuva l'davar hi amuka ma'od. It's a very deep answer. Ki ha'aviv Hu bechinas hapricha shel hateva. What happens in the spring? What happens in the spring? Nature comes back to life. The natural world begins to regenerate. That which looked dead now comes back to life. Shehu bechinas geula leteva. It is a redemption for the natural world. What does it mean? What does it mean spring is a redemption for the natural world? When you look at the natural world during the winter, what does it look like? What does it look like? It looks like nature is down and out, not coming back, it's over. And then spring comes, and the natural world comes back to life. And remember again, how does the natural world come back to life? How does it come back to life? From within. From within, right? Remember again, go back to Tu B'Shvat for just a moment. The significance of Tu B'Shvat is that the sap is coursing through the trees. The trees may not look any different on the outside, but the sap of vitality is coursing through the trees. Nature is redeemed in the spring. What does nature redeemed? It looked dead. I thought nature was gone. I thought the world was done. But yet then nature redeems itself. Ki ba'aviv hu bechinas hapricha shel hateva shu bechinas geula leteva shakol motzi me'akoach al hapoel es ha'or shetamun bo. Something amazing happens in the spring, which is that which looked lifeless and hopeless now begins to regenerate. But it regenerates from within. Because what it tells me, in other words, when spring comes and nature begins to regenerate, what I realize is this whole time, there's been a koach, there's been a power inside of the natural world. So when the trees begin to go out and sprout their leaves or sprout their fruit, that koach didn't just appear right now. It was actually there the entire winter. It was dormant, but it was there. When spring comes, nature is redeemed. I thought nature was lifeless. I thought nature was hopeless. I thought there was no vitality. And now I saw that although externally there was no vitality, at the end of the day, there was always vitality from the beginning. He goes on, V'tavin shesod hagalus, shesod hageula hu ha'otza me'akoach al hapoel. What is redemption? Redemption is taking your potential and turning it into kinetic energy. Redemption, geula, means taking the koach, the energy, the power you have inside, and then bringing it out externally. Sometimes we think, what's geula, what's redemption? Redemption is like something new, something brand new. Beforehand, everything was dead. Now geula, now redemption comes and everything is alive. It's not true, says the Talei Chaim. Redemption means taking the power that was always there. It was always there. It was always inside the tree. It was always in nature. It just wasn't actualized. And then the spring comes, the climate changes, and all of that internal strength now comes out. If you skip down to the end of paragraph, base, he says something so beautiful. He says, he says, do you want to know why Pesach is called the Chag HaAviv? Why is it called the month, the Yom Tov of spring? Why link a lunar Yom Tov to a solar season? Because do you want to know the entire essence of Pesach? Pesach is a celebration of the revival of nature. Pesach, this geula of Pesach, is that we possessed incredible koach, incredible strength, and incredible spiritual vitality that lay dormant for 210 years. But then Pesach came, spring came, and that dormant energy came back to life. Pesach is the return to the self. And by the way, when you understand Pesach this way, everything begins to make sense. You ever wonder, why didn't Paro let us go? Why didn't Paro let us go? Right? Moshe comes, the makos are there, it's clear he's going to lose. Okay, so of course Hashem hardened his heart. But if I were to ask you, right, if Paro's laying down on your couch and you're analyzing him, right, why isn't he letting the Jews go? Any thoughts? I'll tell you what I think. I think at the end of the day, because he said, are you kidding me? Look at these people. They're a nothing. They're a nothing. They turn on each other. They fight with each other. They have no sense of optimism, of hope, of destiny. They have no dreams or aspirations. They're unsalvageable. They're unsalvageable. Klal Yisrael gets to the sea, and the sea won't split, the Medrash says. The sea won't split. Do you know why the sea won't split? Because the sea says to God, come on. do you see these guys? I mean, it's not an exact quote, but you understand, right? Do you see these guys? Do you see these people? You want to change the laws of nature for these people? They're pathetic. They're pathetic. Every single time something goes wrong, they cry, they turn on Moshe, they're accusatory, they're this, they're that, they don't have gratitude. Let them die. Just finish it off, start again from Moshe, and stop. The sea doesn't want to split. Paro doesn't want to let the Jews go because they're nothing. The sea doesn't want to split. And by the way, I'll tell you a little secret. Even Moshe Rabbeinu in the beginning said to God, are you sure you sent me to the right nation? Are you sure these are the chosen people? Are you positive about that? Just want to make sure. Jews, descendants of Abraham, in Egypt, 200 years, these are the people you want to redeem? Even Moshe Rabbeinu has difficulty at first seeing the goodness in Klal Yisrael, but then I'll show you something amazing. Yet if we fast forward to the Yam Suf, what happens at the Yam Suf? Take a look at number 8 now. The Gemara Masechta Sota says, just so you understand the confluence of events. So the Jewish people are standing by the banks of the Red Sea. So remember again, what's the order of events? The order of events are, they turn to Moshe and they say, why did you take us out of Egypt to die? Right? Why couldn't we just die in Egypt? So first, they accuse Moshe of taking them out to die. And then again, they start yelling and screaming, we should go back to Egypt. And then number 8, what happens by the Yam Suf? The tribes began to fight with each other. And what was the fight? Ze omer ani yoreit tchila liyam. Ze omer ani yoreit tchila liyam. They began arguing about who gets to go into the Yam Suf first. What? They're arguing. The sea hasn't split yet. The sea hasn't split. But Moshe said, we got to go. So they're arguing. Now the tribes are arguing who gets the privilege of going into the sea first. The Gemara says, while they're arguing, so ultimately again, the Shevet of Binyamin, Naksham, and Aminadav, he goes in first. So what happened? I don't understand the progression of events. They were just accusing Moshe, blaming Moshe for taking them out, saying, essentially, by the way, when you accuse Moshe, you're ultimately accusing God. And now we're arguing about who's going to go into the sea first. How does that happen? That's called Chag HaAviv. That's called Geula. That's called Shuvah. You see, by the banks of the Red Sea, the Jews found their inner self. They found their sap. They returned to who they were. They reclaimed their former sense of self. That's why, by the way, just as an aside, Shvi'i Shal Pesach, the 7th day of Pesach, when we go out and we commemorate the splitting of the sea, it takes on even a more simchadik tone than the rest of Yom Tov. Why is it more joyous than the rest of Yom Tov? Because on a deep level, it was on that moment by the Red Sea where the Jewish people did Shuvah. They didn't turn into someone new. They reclaimed their former selves that had been lost over 210 years of servitude. They felt the emergence of their inner nature. They experienced their spring. They experienced their Shuvah. And now if we come full circle, we begin to appreciate the distinction between Chometz and Matzah. You remember again, what's the distinction between Chometz and Matzah? 1 letter or 2 letters, which are Ches and Hey. Ches and Hey. So remember again, the Chometz has the Ches, Matzah has the Hey. So perhaps, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trying to teach us is as follows. You see, Matzah has the Hey of Tshuva. Matzah has the Hey of reclaiming the self. Matzah has the Hey of being able to return to yourself. Chometz, remember again, what happens with Ches? Ches, you could fall out, but you can't come back in. Do you know one of the major distinctions between Chometz and Matzah? One of the major distinctions? How do you make Chometz? So the answer is you don't make Chometz. Chometz is made by external forces. Right? Remember again, there are 2 ways something could become Chometz. You introduce a leavening agent, like yeast, and therefore it's the yeast that creates Chometz. Or, what else could create Chometz? Time. The passage of time. Don't do anything. Time or yeast, time or a leavening agent. So something amazing about Chometz. The identity of Chometz is not created by the individual. The identity of Chometz is created by external stimuli. And perhaps the severity of the prohibition of Chometz is to teach us something amazing, which is, don't let your identity in life be created by others. Be a matzah Jew, not a Chometz. You see, matzah, on the other hand, how do you make matzah? If you've ever made matzah, by the way, it looks very easy, but it's actually not. Why? Because if you want to make matzah, you have to knead the dough. again, I guess I don't have that much dough kneading experience, but I know when I baked matzah, my hands were tired after like 30 seconds. It's intense. You have to keep going. In other words, if you want to make matzah, you got to make it yourself. Matzah can't be made by time, because if you let time set in, chometz occurs. Matzah can't be created by a leavening agent, because then it's chometz. Matzah is made by you and only you. The difference between chometz and matzah, the difference between tshuva and non-tshuva, is the difference between falling out and never coming back in, or falling out and finally back in. In other words, matzah represents the ability to create your own identity. And for the purpose of tshuva, it means the ability to reclaim the identity that you have lost. Versus chometz, which is allowing other people to tell you who you need to be or what you need to be. Chometz is when you give other people the power of creation over who you are. And matzah is when you decide to create your own identity. Chometz says that when you lose your way and you fall out of God's grace, you fall out the bottom, there's no way back in. And matzah says, even if you stray, there's always a way back. It's true. You can't come back in the same way you fell out. You have to work a little bit harder to get yourself back in, but you could always get back in. And now we understand why chometz is dealt with so severely. Because chometz represents the antithesis of who we are. Chometz says there's no tshuva. The ches is closed on all three sides. So once you fall out, there's no way back. Chometz says you are who the world tells you you are going to be. You are who other people dictate you need to be. And so comes HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he says, listen, I can't outlaw chometz the entire year, but I will make it severely prohibited for 7 days. Because if you want to be successful in life, you have to believe in tshuva. You have to believe that you could find your way back in. And you have to believe that you could reclaim your former self. And if you want to be a proper Jew, you have to create your own identity and not let others create one for you. This is why the prohibition of chometz is dealt with so severely. And I think if we kind of take a step back for a moment, I think many of us lose our sense of self over the course of the journey of life. Now, I think the good news is we don't think about it that much, which sometimes it's good not to think so. I often think that like people who don't think are much happier. It just appears that life is so much sweeter, right? You go through your day, whatever, good day, bad day, whatever. You don't really read that much into it, and there's tomorrow and there's next week. When you think, life is much more challenging. And I think if we begin to think, we realize, again, I can only speak for myself, but you feel like you've lost who you are over the course of life. And when I say lost who you are, I don't mean engaging in negative behaviors or sinful behaviors. It's just kind of as we go through life, we lose our identity, right? If somebody were to stop you and to ask you, tell me who you are in one sentence. Tell me who you are. So of course, the biggest temptation is to define yourself by your profession. Oh, what am I? I'm a rabbi, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a teacher, whatever it is. But that's not who I am. That's not who I am. That's what I do, and hopefully something very meaningful in my life. But who am I? What are my dreams? What are my aspirations? What are my goals? How do I measure if I'm living a successful life or not? And we often lose our way. And I think what often happens is that many of us become people we need to become. I want to give you just an example of this. I'm sure that my mishpacha is going to get very upset at me for this, but it was very straight. Just don't tell the girls about this. My second oldest daughter is now in the parsha of seminaries, right? And so she had her seminary interviews. And it was on a Sunday, and she was going out on Motzei Shabbos. I said, Sheffer, where are you going? Oh, I have to borrow shoes. I said, I checked my credit card statement. I'm pretty sure you have plenty of shoes, right? Baruch Hashem, there's enough shoes in our house. We could open a wholesale business. Hey, she says, no. I need a specific kind of shoe. Okay, so I don't know, I'm not such a mumcha in shoes, but I need a specific kind of shoe for this, and a specific kind of earring for this, and a specific look for this. And I felt so sad. I felt so sad. And what I wanted to say was, Shefala, don't let the world dictate to you how you're supposed to look, or that a particular look, this is good and this is not good. Yes, I want to be clear. Is conformity a necessity? Absolutely. Absolutely. We're all about conformity. We have the same 613 mitzvahs. We have halachas of tznius. We have halachas of kashrus. We have halachas of Shabbos. So we of course we have conformity. But yet so many times we force conformity when it's not necessary. Because we create a model that this is the model. This is the model. So if you fit like this down to the shoes, you're good to go. But if a different shoe, a different loafer, a different this, a different that, it raises questions. As if a piece of foot apparel has anything to do with anything. And as we get older, this takes on greater intensity. In the area of shiduchim, it takes on incredible intensity. I'm not going to spend time on shiduchim right now. In the area of shiduchim, it takes on incredible intensity. The most ridiculous things, where someone decided that this is what a good boy looks like, and this is what a good girl looks like. So the great thing is you could be the biggest faker in the world, but as long as you look the part, you're good to go. The problem just is if you're a genuine person, but don't want to buy into the fakeness that sometimes surrounds us, you're stuck, because the system is the system, as I'm often reminded. And so as we get older, we fall into these mindsets. And again, I want to be clear, I'm not a buck the system kind of guy. I'm a big believer in the system. The system is what keeps our people intact. And the system is what has allowed us, is what preserved us. So those who buck the system or try to make inappropriate innovations, they're doing a terrible, terrible disservice to Yiddishkeit, and it's an incredible affront to the Ribono Shel Olam and everything we hold sacred. So conformity is a necessity, but at the same time, don't let someone dictate who and what you are. Find yourself. And there's no better time to do that than on Pesach, because Pesach is the Chag HaAviv. Pesach is the emergence of the self. Pesach has Matzah, which has a Hey, not a Ches, which allows me to reclaim that which has been lost. Imagine for a moment if you took some time in the days leading up to Pesach. I don't know that anyone has time before Pesach. I would suggest doing this at the Seder. The problem is if you close your eyes at the Seder, you run the risk of waking up the next morning. Right? But imagine for a moment if you're able to carve out for yourself a few minutes of solitude. Solitude. No one else around. All the devices are off. And you think about, who am I? And maybe the first question was, who was I? If I think about the prime of my life, who was I in that prime? Who was I in that prime? And then what happened to that person? And by the way, there's a lot of good reasons why we change over time. A lot of stuff happens in life that changes us. But what happened to that person? And how can I reclaim her? How could I reclaim him? How could I get, I'll just share with you on a personal level. I had an experience like this last Pesach. I think, last Pesach was the beginning of the pandemic. It's incredible to think that we're talking now a year. And for many of us, it was a dramatically different kind of Yom Tiv on every level. Thank God, I'm privileged that Baruch Hashem, I have a family in my house, and so it's never quiet, and there's always commotion, there's always something going on. So usually we would have extended mishpacha, but this was like the first time in probably 2 decades that it was Aviva and I and our children, and that was the whole Seder. And it was, I have to say, one of the most incredible Seder experiences of my entire life. And I want to share with you a moment from that Seder. It was right by Shvoch HaMascha, right when we pour the kosher elio. So we remember that the minhag is that we open the door. We open the door. So of course, again, we open the door, Shvoch HaMascha, it's the shimurim, we show we're not afraid. But of course, I always tell my children the same thing. I tell them, when you open the door, You have to believe with all of your heart that Eliyahu Hanavi is going to be standing there. You have to believe. It's Pesach. Tonight is the night of miracles. Tonight is the night when 210 years of servitude ended in the blink of an eye. If 210 years of servitude, if slaves could become free men tonight, then why can't Eliyahu Hanavi come? So I said to my children, I said, before we open the door, I said, does everyone believe that Eliyahu Hanavi could be here tonight? I said, yes. I said, but before we open the door, if he's not here, you can't be disappointed. If he's not here, you just have to say, I'm sad. I wish Eliyahu Hanavi was here. But if not today, then Emir Tzashem tomorrow. And we opened the door. And unfortunately, Eliyahu Hanavi wasn't there. And I remember we walking out into the dead of the night. I think it was still cold last Pesach also. And that feeling of longing for something greater. And it was probably because the pandemic was starting and there was so much unknown and no one knew what was going to happen or how things were going to unfold. And we felt so dependent on the Ribono Shel Olam. And I remember that feeling of standing out there that night underneath the dark sky with all of my children, almost all my children, my married daughter wasn't with us actually, almost all of my children, and wanting so badly for something bigger in life, yearning something more. And then it hit me. I hadn't felt that way in years. And I said to myself, wow, I used to always be a person who dreamed bigger. I always used to be the person who said, I want to do something dramatic. I want to accomplish something, not dramatic public, but dramatic that I know that I made a difference. I was always that person who wanted something more out of life. And I said to myself, what happened to that person? How could it be that this is the first time I'm feeling that after so many years? But that's what it means to do tshuva. That's what it means to reclaim your lost sense of self. We have to take the time to identify who we once were and who we want to become again. And you can't wait until the Seder, because at the Seder, there's already too much stuff going on. Right, there's too much activity, right? Yeah, of course, you have the general Seder tug of war, right? The family member who wants to go fast, the family member who wants to say 17 divrei Torah on every single word in the Haggadah, right? And of course, Baruch Hashem, nothing like World War III at the Seder for Avas Yisrael, Shalom Yisrael, it's great, right? So Seder is not usually for most of us like a very contemplative time. It's Baruch Hashem, there's a good kind of cacophony. But to take the time before the Seder to really think about this. I don't eat Chometz over Pesach. I only eat matzah. I need to find my way back into the hay. I need to find my way back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the truth is, I need to find my way back to me. Because there's so much good inside of me. There's so much beauty inside of me. There's so much holiness inside of me. Just for whatever the reason, over the journey of life, I lose it, or I misplace it, or I misappropriate it. But now I want it back. That's the tshuva of matzah. That's the Chag HaAviv. And if you bring this full circle, with this I'll conclude. Perhaps this is the meaning of chayiv. I didn't forget about the first part. This is the meaning of chayiv adam liros es atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa mitzrayim. Remember again an hour ago, we asked our first question. What does this mean that a person is supposed to see themselves as if they left Egypt? What does that mean? How am I supposed to relate to that? Perhaps you just have to put the comma in a different place. And perhaps so you have to read it as like this. Chayav Adam Liros Es Atzmo. Do you know what the avoda of the Seder is? Find yourself. Find yourself. Find your inner self. Reclaim your lost sense of self. And if you do that, Ki'ilu hu yatsa mitzrayim, then you'll be just like our Zaydas and Babas who left Egypt. Because what did they do? They left a downtrodden, beaten down nation of slaves. And then by the banks of the Red Sea, they found their inner sap. They found their vitality. They found their former self. They did tshuva. They experienced the Jewish spring. They went ahead and they reconnected with their former lost self. Chayiv Adam liros es atzmo. What you have to do on Pesach is find atzmo, find yourself. And if you do that, then you will recreate the redemptive and salvational experience for yourself, for your mishpacha, and for all of Klal Yisrael. So we should be zochem Yirtzeh Hashem. We're getting a good head start on Pesach preparation. So I give us all two brachas. I give us the bracha number one, that in the days leading up to Pesach, Pesach is not just about preparing your home. It's about preparing your neshama. The same way I clean the Chometz out of my cabinets, I need to clean the Chometz out of my heart and soul as well. I want to get ready for this Yom Tov. We should be zochem Yirtzeh Hashem to do tshuva. We should be zochem to come back in through the little nook and cranny on the hay. We should be zochem to reclaim our relationship with God and our relationship with ourselves, our former selves. And if we do that, then Yirtzeh Hashem, when we open the door this coming Pesach night, when we open the door, halavai will be zochem, not just to wish for Elio, but be zochem Yirtzeh Hashem to see his smiling countenance waiting for us, telling us that Mashiach is on his way. Geula has arrived. The Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt, and it is time for all of us to go back to Eretz Yisrael together and forever. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening.